Have you ever been in a situation where you completely offended someone from another culture, like entirely by accident?
Oh, absolutely. It is the worst feeling.
Right. Just simply because you didn't know the rules, you're standing there and the tension in the room is just suffocating.
Yeah, you realize pretty quickly that you desperately need a mediator in that moment.
Exactly. You need someone who perfectly understands your intentions, but also, perfectly understands the unwritten laws of the person you just offended so they can step in and fix the relationship.
It's a terrifying feel. I mean, being on one side of a massive divide and having basically no idea how to cross it.
Yeah.
And historically speaking, that exact feeling of alienation is actually the driving force behind almost every ancient religion.
Which is such a perfect transition to the fascinating text we're unpacking today for our deep dive.
Yes, we are getting into some really rich material today.
We're looking at the biblical book of Hebrews, specifically chapters 4 through 7, based on the sources we have. And our mission today is really to explore this overarching theme. Jesus is better than earthly priests. He is the eternal bridge builder.
It's a huge claim.
It is, because the core problem this text addresses, it isn't just a cultural misunderstanding, right? It's the ultimate divide.
The biggest gap possible.
Exactly. It's the gulf between deeply flawed, sinful humans and a completely holy, perfect God. And, the ancient solution to this was always the priesthood.
Right, which brings up a really cool linguistic detail.
Oh, yeah, the Latin word. I learned this recently from our source material. The ancient Latin word for priest is pontifex.
I love that. That is one of my absolute favorite etymologies.
So good.
Because pontifex literally translates to bridge builder.
Mm.
I mean, in the ancient mind, a priest's entire job was to just stand in the middle of that terrifying gap and construct a bridge between humanity and the divine.
But to really grasp what Hebrews is doing with this bridge builder concept, we kind of had to look at the psychological state of the people actually receiving this letter, right?
Yeah, context is everything here.
So set the scene for us. Who is actually reading this in the first century?
Well, it's written to Jewish Christians who are facing immense social and, honestly, physical persecution.
Okay.
And for their entire lives, their faith was incredibly tangible. I mean, you had a massive temple in Jerusalem. It smelled of incense. You had ringing bells, these elaborate rituals.
And a very visible high priest walking around.
Exactly. A guy you could actually see. But they walked away from all of that sensory comfort to follow Jesus, a Messiah who had been crucified and was now entirely invisible to them.
I mean, that would be incredibly disorienting.
Utterly disorienting. And under the crushing pressure of this persecution, they are experiencing profound nostalgia.
Like they just want to go back to what was comfortable.
Right. They are tempted to abandon this new invisible faith and just drift back into the old, familiar, tangible religious system.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So the author of Hebrews is writing to them with one very urgent, profound argument. Don't go backward. Christianity is superior to the old system because Jesus is superior.
Right.
He's greater than the prophets, greater than the angels, and crucially for our deep dive today, he is the ultimate eternal pontifex. He is greater than any earthly priest.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics of that. If you are going to build a bridge across a massive chasm, the engineering requires that bridge to be firmly anchored deep into the bedrock on both sides, right?
That's a great way to picture it, yeah.
So a mediator has to intimately understand the terrain of both parties. The argument here in the text is that Jesus fits this role uniquely because he is both fully God and fully man.
Precisely.
He anchors into the divine, but he also fully anchors into the human experience.
And this is exactly where we have to untangle a massive misconception about his human experience, according to the sources.
Okay, what kind of misconception?
Well, the text insists that he perfectly understands our weaknesses, because he was tempted in every way we are, yet he never sinned. But people often confuse the concept of innocence with the concept of virtue.
Oh, I really want to dig into that. Because honestly, I always assumed those were just synonyms for being good.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about a baby sleeping in a pram.
Okay.
You look at that infant and think, wow, what a pure, innocent child.
And they are?
They absolutely are. But they aren't gossiping. They aren't embezzling money. They aren't betraying their friends.
Right, mostly because they can't talk or walk.
Exactly. It's not because they have tremendous moral fortitude, but because they simply don't have the capacity or the opportunity yet.
Oh.
Innocence is doing no wrong because you haven't been tested.
Oh, I see.
Virtue, on the other hand, is forged. Virtue is doing the right thing while staring directly into the face of immense, agonizing temptation to do the exact opposite.
I struggle with this part, though, and I think a lot of people do. Well, if Jesus is the Son of God, if his nature is fundamentally divine and sinless, how is his temptation actually real?
That is the big question, yeah.
It just feels like a rigged game. Like he had a cheat code, so of course he won. Was it actually a fair fight?
That is the pivotal question.
Yeah.
Because if it was a rigged game, his sympathy for us is entirely hollow.
Hmm.
But let's look at how temptation actually operates in the sources.
Okay.
Think of a medieval knight in a custom-forged suit of armor. No matter how perfectly crafted that plate metal is, there have to be weak points.
Sure.
There have to be joints at the elbows, the knees, the armpits, because if the armor doesn't move, the soldier can't breathe or fight.
Right. You have to have flexibility to be human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And an intelligent enemy doesn't swing a broadsword at the thickest part of the breastplate. That's just a total waste of energy.
They go for the joints.
They study the knight, find the moving joints, the chinks in the armor, and drive a dagger in right there.
Wow.
The author of Hebrews argues that Jesus was fully human, which means he had human joints. He experienced exhaustion, profound grief, intense hunger, and deep loneliness.
So the devil didn't tempt him with, abstract, easily avoidable evils.
Not at all. He targeted the chinks. He attacked Jesus precisely at the moments of his greatest physical and emotional vulnerability.
Okay, so that really helps humanize the experience for me.
Yeah.
But there's still a lingering doubt about the intensity of it, did he really feel it the way I feel it?
Well, consider the actual mechanism of temptation and failure. We all have a breaking point.
Definitely.
When a temptation hits, the psychological pressure starts building, gets heavier and heavier, all the rationalization starts swirling in our heads, and eventually we snap, we give in.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
But think about what that actually means mathematically. If I give in to a temptation when the pressure reaches, say, 60% of its maximum capacity,
Okay.
I never actually feel the remaining 40%. The pressure releases the exact moment I surrender.
Oh, wow, wait. I have literally never thought about the math of that.
It changes everything, doesn't it?
By failing, we basically buy our way out of the worst part of the pressure.
Exactly. We escape the absolute peak of the suffering by caving in. But because Jesus never sinned, because he never surrendered, he couldn't utilize that escape hatch.
Oh, my goodness.
He had to endure the pressure building to 70%, 80%, 90%, all the way to absolute maximum capacity.
So he felt all of it.
He is the only human being in history to ever feel the complete, unadulterated, 100% crushing force of temptation.
That completely flips the paradigm for me. To truly feel the full, agonizing weight of temptation, you actually have to remain sinless. The reward for not giving in is that you have to suffer the absolute worst of it.
And that profound suffering is the why behind this text's most beautiful invitation. Because he endured that maximum threshold, he possesses a radical, hard-won sympathy for human weakness.
That is so powerful.
The author of Hebrews tells the reader that because of this specific tested virtue, you don't have to cower in fear when you fail.
Right.
You are invited to come boldly, with absolute confidence, to what the text calls the throne of grace, to find mercy for your past failures and grace for your current battles.
It's like you're not approaching a detached CEO who inherited the company and doesn't know how the factory floor works.
That's a great analogy.
You're approaching someone who worked the line, took the worst shifts, and took the physical toll.
Precisely.
But the text doesn't let us just set up camp at the throne of grace and stay there forever, does it? There's a really sharp pivot in chapter 5.
There is, yeah.
Having access to this incredible mediator means the believer has a responsibility to actually grow up.
Yes, the transition from spiritual infancy to spiritual maturity. And the author uses this brilliant biological metaphor here. The difference between milk and solid food, or meat. Milk is for infants. It's pre-digested, it goes down easy, and it really just requires a single swallow.
So, in a practical sense, based on the source, what is spiritual milk?
The text defines it as the foundational truths. Things like repentance, the basics of faith, the concept of resurrection.
So, essential stuff.
Absolutely vital for survival when you're a new believer. But biologically, if an adult tries to live exclusively on infant formula, they will become malnourished and physically atrophy.
Yeah, that would not end well.
The same is true spiritually. Meat represents the complex, challenging realities of faith. Meat requires effort. You had to cut it up, chew on it, wrestle with it, and digest it over time to extract the nutrients.
So what happens to a person's brain or, their soul if they just refuse to chew the meat? Because I know plenty of people who prefer their faith to fit neatly on a bumper sticker.
The author connects spiritual laziness directly to moral perplexity. The text says that solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil.
Hmm.
If you only consume milk, you are demanding a simplistic black and white rulebook for life.
Right, which life rarely gives us.
Exactly. What happens when you're sitting in a hospital waiting room trying to make an agonizing ethical decision about a loved one's life support? Or you're navigating the incredibly gray areas of modern corporate ethics?
The bumper sticker definitely doesn't cover that.
It doesn't. And if you haven't exercised your spiritual muscles by wrestling with complex theology, the meat your moral intuition hasn't developed.
You just freeze up.
You will find yourself paralyzed by the gray areas. Engaging with deep truth isn't just an academic exercise. It literally rewires your ability to instinctively sense the heart of God in chaotic situations.
Which brings us to arguably the hardest, most complex piece of meat in this entire letter.
I have a feeling I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, I have to ask about the severe warning in chapter 6 about falling away. I've seen people spiral into deep anxiety over these verses.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, I grew up hearing the phrase, once saved, always saved. But this text sounds like a direct threat that you can permanently lose your salvation if you mess up. How do the sources reconcile that?
It is arguably the most debated passage in the New Testament, and it absolutely induces anxiety if misunderstood.
So how do we unpack it?
The key is recognizing that the author is making a razor-sharp psychological distinction between two very different concepts: backsliding and apostasy.
Okay, walk me through the difference.
Backsliding is when a believer stumbles. You fall into a pattern of sin, you give into addiction, you lose your temper, you just lose your way for a season.
Okay, that feels very human.
It is. And the overwhelming testimony of the text is that the backslider can always return. The throne of grace is always open. Christ welcomes the broken with open arms.
So what is apostasy then?
Apostasy is an entirely different mechanism. Apostasy is a deliberate, conscious, and permanent turning of one's back on Christ after having fully experienced his truth.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's a person who has tasted the reality of grace, understood the gospel completely, and then makes a settled, willful decision to say, I consider this a lie and I reject it entirely. The terrifying warning in Hebrews is that if someone reaches that point of absolute, willful rejection, they have burned the only bridge back to God. They have cut off their own line of retreat.
But how does someone even get to that point? I just can't imagine someone waking up on a Tuesday and deciding to completely abandon a profound faith.
They don't. And that is the true warning of the text. Apostasy rarely happens via sudden explosion. It happens through drifting.
Drifting.
Think about the ocean. You don't have to actively row your boat to get lost at sea. You just have to pull your oars in, fall asleep at the wheel, and let the undercurrent do the work.
Oh, man. It's the spiritual laziness we were just talking about.
Exactly. The progression is subtle. You stop chewing the meat. You start making small compromises in your ethics. You silence your conscience when it nudges you.
Yeah, just little things here and there.
And neurobiologically speaking, every time you ignore your conscience, you prune the neural pathways that allow you to feel conviction.
So you're literally changing your brain.
Over time, your spiritual senses go entirely numb. You drift further and further out on the cultural tide until one day you look up, the shoreline is completely gone, and you don't even care.
That is chilling. It's the slow fade. So how does the author of Hebrews tell these exhausted, tempted Christians to stop drifting?
By using some brilliant nautical imagery, to survive a powerful tide, a ship needs an anchor.
Right.
For the believer, that anchor is the unchanging nature of God. The author pulls from the ancient story of Abraham, noting that when God made a promise to bless Abraham, he wanted to guarantee it with an oath.
Right, but when humans swear an oath, we swear by something greater than ourselves, like swearing on a Bible or, on our mother's life.
Exactly. But because there is literally no entity in the cosmos greater than God, he had to swear by himself. He bound his own eternal character to the promise.
That's a pretty solid guarantee.
The text argues that the believer has two unchangeable things to hold on to: God's promise and God's oath. This hope is an anchor for the soul, firm and secure.
I love that imagery.
But there is a beautiful twist to it. A ship's anchor drops down into the dark, murky ocean floor where you can't see it. But this spiritual anchor is cast upward. It goes behind the veil into heaven itself.
Which begs the question, Who is standing behind that veil holding the anchor?
Right, exactly.
Because this brings us to the final masterful stroke of the author's argument. We're introduced to the fact that Jesus is operating under a totally different kind of priesthood.
A vastly superior one.
Yeah, patterned after a highly mysterious historical figure named Melchizedek.
Melchizedek is one of the most enigmatic characters in all of ancient literature. He steps onto the pages of Genesis 14 out of nowhere.
Literally just walks into the story.
Abraham has just won a brutal regional war, and he is suddenly met by this figure who is identified as both a king and a priest of God Most High.
Why is that combination so shocking to the original readers of Hebrews?
Because under the Jewish law that was established centuries later, those two roles were kept strictly violently separate.
Oh, really?
Yes. The kings had to come from the royal tribe of Judah. The priests had to come from the priestly tribe of Levi. It was an ancient system of checks and balances. You absolutely could not hold both offices.
But Melchizedek does.
He does.
I love looking at the literal translation of his names, too.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Melchizedek translates from ancient Hebrew to King of Righteousness. And he is also the King of Salem. Salem is the ancient root word for peace. It's where we get the name Jerusalem, the city of peace.
And the sequence of those two titles is incredibly profound. King of Righteousness first, then King of Peace.
Why is the order so important?
Because it is a fundamental law of the universe that you cannot achieve genuine peace until you have first established righteousness.
Wow, we see that play out in our own society all the time. People demand peace in politics, in their families, in their cities, but they want to bypass justice to get there.
They just want the conflict to stop.
Right. But a peace that isn't built on a foundation of righteousness isn't actually peace. It's just a temporary ceasefire.
It's a fragile illusion.
Yeah.
But beyond his names, the author of Hebrews points out something deeply unorthodox about Melchizedek's historical record. He reads the Genesis account almost like a resume, and he focuses entirely on what is missing.
Which is such a brilliant analytical technique. Sometimes what someone leaves off their resume tells you way more than what they include.
Definitely. In the ancient Near East, and particularly for the Levitical priesthood, your genealogy was your entire identity.
It was everything.
If you couldn't prove your unbroken lineage back to Aaron, the first high priest, you were disqualified. Your family tree was your authority.
Okay, so what about Melchizedek?
The text notes that Melchizedek has no recorded father, no mother, no genealogy, no record of his birth, and no record of his death.
He just walks into the narrative, blesses Abraham, and vanishes.
Exactly. And the author of Hebrews interprets this glaring omission as a deliberate literary pattern orchestrated by God.
To show what?
It establishes the precedent for an eternal priesthood. A priesthood that doesn't derive its authority from biological pedigree or a temporary human lifespan,
Right.
but from an indestructible, endless life.
Oh, I see.
Jesus, the text argues, belongs to this eternal order of Melchizedek. He is the ultimate king-priest.
It really highlights how deeply flawed the old Levitical system was. Oh, you know what this reminds me of?
What's that?
There's this famous infrastructure project in Brasilia, down in Brazil. They started building this massive, architecturally stunning concrete bridge over a lake.
Okay.
It has these beautiful sweeping arches, but they ran out of funding or political will, and they just stopped building it. So if you go there, you can drive halfway out over the water, and then the bridge just abruptly ends in midair.
Wow.
It looks impressive, but it fundamentally fails to connect you to the other shore.
That is the absolute perfect visualization of the Levitical priesthood. Aaron and his descendants were an unfinished bridge.
Yeah.
They possessed the architecture of religion, but they couldn't actually close the gap, primarily for two huge reasons. First, they were deeply flawed humans themselves.
Right.
Before a high priest could step up to the altar to offer a sacrifice for the sins of the nation, he had to offer a sacrifice for his own sins. He was standing on the wrong side of the chasm to begin with.
He needed a bridge just as badly as the people he was supposedly helping.
Exactly. And the second critical flaw was human mortality. The bridge construction was constantly interrupted by death.
Oh, because the priests kept dying?
Right. You might get a remarkably holy, compassionate high priest for a few decades, but eventually he would die, and you'd have to start all over again with his son, who might be totally corrupt.
So the system was just trapped in an endless loop of failure and death.
It was.
But then we reach the absolute climax of chapters 6 and 7. Jesus builds a better bridge, not just because he possesses an indestructible life, but because of the mechanics of the sacrifice itself.
This is where the entire system gets completely upended. Under the Old Covenant, The priest and the sacrifice were two separate entities.
Right.
The human priest had to constantly bring outside substitutes, goats, bulls, lambs to the altar.
But the animal didn't choose to be there. I mean, an animal doesn't possess moral virtue.
Exactly. It's an inadequate substitute.
Hmm.
But Jesus fundamentally disrupts this dynamic. He doesn't bring a sacrifice. The priest becomes the sacrifice.
He offers himself.
Yes,
Yeah.
because he is fully God, fully man, and possesses the hard-won virtue of having faced maximum temptation without sinning. He is the only entity in the cosmos qualified to be both the perfect, flawless priest and the perfect, unblemished sacrifice.
And because the sacrifice is perfect, it never has to be repeated. The bridge is finished. The concrete actually touches the other side.
And this leads to the most staggering comfort in the entire text. Because Jesus conquered death and lives forever, the author says he ever lives to intercede for us.
What does that mean practically?
Well, a human priest clocks out, gets tired, and eventually dies. But right now, at this exact moment, in the presence of God, the eternal king priest is actively advocating for you.
Oh, wow.
He knows exactly how hard it is to be human, and he is actively securing your absolute forgiveness. He is able to save completely to the absolute uttermost reaches of time.
That is incredibly profound. So if we
Right.
pull all these threads together from today's deep dive, human religion, with all its elaborate rituals, its rules, and its constant need for human mediators, is ultimately just an unfinished bridge over a terrifying canyon.
That's a great summary, yeah.
But Jesus is the true pontifex. He perfectly sympathizes with our deepest weaknesses because he absorbed the full, crushing force of human temptation.
Right.
He serves as an unbreakable anchor for our minds when the culture tries to slowly drift us out to sea. And he permanently spanned the gulf by offering himself.
Which means the entire religious paradigm shifts. Because you have the ultimate high priest, you no longer need to rely on earthly mediators.
That's huge.
You don't need a human to stand between you and the divine anymore. Through the finished work of Jesus, the text invites you directly into what is known as the priesthood of all believers.
So the veil has been torn. You have direct access.
The gap has been spanned. You just have to walk across.
Well, it is time for you, our listener, to digest some of this solid food we've been chewing on today. As we close out our deep dive, we want to leave you with 3 reflection questions to mull over on your commute, while you're making dinner, or wherever you find yourself right now.
Always good to have some practical takeaways.
Definitely. Number 1, do you approach God with bold confidence through Jesus alone? Or are you still secretly exhausting yourself, trying to build your own flimsy bridge through perfect behavior and religious checkboxes? Number 2, are you actively training your moral intuition by chewing on the deep truths of your faith? Or are you asleep at the wheel, slowly drifting away on a diet of spiritual milk?
That's a tough one to honestly answer.
It is. And number 3, is your mind truly anchored? When chaos hits, do you trust that you have an eternal high priest who intimately understands your pain and is actively interceding for you?
Such good questions to wrestle with.
But I also want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to take with you. If Jesus is the ultimate pontifex, the eternal bridge builder who crossed the impossible divide for us, what does that mean for your daily life?
Right. How does it apply?
In a society that is increasingly fractured, polarized, and standing on opposite sides of massive chasms, how does following the ultimate bridge builder change the way you interact with the person across from you today? Are we called to step into the gap for others?
That is something to chew on, for sure.
Think about that as you go about your week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive exploration. Keep asking the hard questions, keep chewing on the meat, and keep digging deep.